The gleaming chrome reflected the setting sun. A monument to a different time, until a voice, sharp as a whip crack, cut through the calm. "That monstrosity isn't allowed here." A flash of anger, a whispered threat, and then a bold, desperate idea ignites. The crowd holds its breath, the stakes are everything, and a single car is about to become a battleground. The heat of the late afternoon hung thick and humid over the manicured lawns of the bluffs, a new development where every blade of grass seemed to be held in check by a committee. Alex Sterling, a man whose hands were more at home with a wrench than a spreadsheet, felt the unspoken rules closing in on him. He'd moved here for his wife, Sarah, for the good schools and the promise of a quiet life. But his peace was often a negotiation with the neighborhood's self-appointed queen, Brenda Sterling, no relation. Brenda lived 2 doors down and operated under the self-anointed title of Community Standards Liaison, a role she had created and inhabited with the zealous fervor of a crusader. Her kingdom was a realm of enforced beige palettes, approved lawn ornaments, and meticulously straight garage doors. Alex's one-man rebellion was his garage, a sanctuary for a project a decade in the making, a 1967 Mustang Fastback, midnight blue, a relic of a time when cars had soul. The Mustang wasn't just a car. It was a ghost. It was the same model his father had owned, the one he'd learned to change oil on, the one they had dreamed of restoring together before his father passed. When Alex had finally finished the restoration, a year ago, the car gleamed with the kind of polished, unreproachable beauty that could only be achieved with love and obsession. It was, in his mind, the pinnacle of automotive art. This Saturday was the community's annual summer soiree at the clubhouse, an event designed to reinforce the very homogeneity Alex found stifling. Against Sarah's gentle warnings, he decided to do something he'd been hesitant to do since they moved in: drive the Mustang. The plan was simple: park it in the overflow lot, far from the pristine SUVs and electric vehicles, and enjoy the party. He rolled down his street, the throaty rumble of the V8, a raw, visceral sound against the neighborhood's silent, manicured perfection. People on their porches turned their heads. Some smiled, a flash of genuine human warmth. He saw a couple of kids on bikes point and stare, their eyes wide with awe. It felt good. It felt real. The clubhouse lot was already a checkerboard of gleaming, sensible cars. Alex found an empty spot near a line of trees away from the main entrance. He killed the engine, and the silence that followed was deafening. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool fender, a ritual of farewell and a silent promise to keep it safe. The party was exactly as he expected, a sea of khakis and polo shirts, polite laughter and conversation about property values. He spotted Sarah talking to a group of her friends, a flash of genuine joy on her face. He smiled, a small concession to the world she had built for them. He was getting a drink when a familiar clipped voice cut through the air. "Alex, what is that?" He turned. Brenda Sterling, in a crisp white pantsuit that looked starched enough to stand on its own, was marching toward him, a small folder clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her gaze wasn't on him. It was fixed on the far side of the parking lot, on the glint of midnight blue. "That," Alex said, his voice calmer than he felt, "is my car. I'm aware. What I'm asking is, what is it doing here? It drove here, Brenda." His sarcasm was a small, dangerous spark. "This is a community event, Alex. We have certain standards." She opened the folder and pointed to a page. Section 4, subsection B. All vehicles parked on community property must be of a modern, commercially available design and in a state of operational readiness that reflects the upscale nature of our community. "That car is a testament to operational readiness," Alex shot back. "It's in better shape than half the new cars in this lot. It's a classic, it's a show car." "It's an eyesore," Brenda hissed, low enough for only him to hear. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "Frankly, it's a blight. It diminishes the property values. I've already received 2 complaints." A lie, he knew. She was the complaint. He could feel the eyes of other partygoers turning toward them, drawn by the tension. Sarah was now watching from a distance, a worried frown on her face. There's nothing in the bylaws that says I can't park a vintage vehicle in an overflow lot, Alex said, his voice rising, a challenge in the air. It's implicit in the spirit of the document, Brenda said, her tone dripping with self-righteous certainty. This is a family community. We don't need loud, clunky hot rods. Loud? Clunky? That car is a masterpiece. And you know what else is in the bylaws? Section 3, subsection A, no resident shall engage in harassment or unreasonable antagonism toward another resident without due cause. He had the document memorized. It had been his one-man insurgency against her months-long campaign to have him put a tasteful statue in his front yard. A flicker of genuine rage crossed her face. The word harassment was her word, not his. She pulled out her phone. Fine, I'll make this formal. I'm contacting the committee. Your car needs to be removed from this property immediately, or you'll be issued a violation notice with a significant fine. Consider this your final warning. She turned on her heel and walked away, a stiff, victorious march toward her circle of sycophants. Alex stood there, his hands clenched into fists, the words stinging him more than he would admit. The '67 Mustang, the car that was the last tangible link to his father, was now a symbol of his defiance. Or his failure. He saw the furtive glances, the whispers, the way people averted their eyes. Some looked sympathetic, a few looked like they were enjoying the drama, but no one, not a single person, came to stand with him. He was alone in this. The weight of his defiance felt heavy. He saw Sarah walk toward him, her face a mask of concern. He knew what she was going to say, just move it. It's not worth it. Let's just have a nice night. He couldn't blame her. She was a woman of peace, a person who chose to navigate life's currents rather than fight them. But he was tired of navigating. He was tired of giving in. Brenda was already on the phone, her voice a low, urgent hum. He watched her, a woman so committed to her vision of perfection that she would stomp on anything, on anyone, who didn't fit. The thought of moving the car, of surrendering to her petty tyranny, made his stomach turn. It was more than a car. It was his father's memory. It was his own identity. It was a fight he didn't want, but couldn't avoid. An idea, reckless and brilliant, a spark of pure rebellion ignited in his mind. He looked at the perfect, shimmering pool, a calm, turquoise rectangle in the center of the party. He looked at the wide, paved path leading right to it. And he looked at the Mustang, a thing of beauty and power, waiting patiently in the lot. Brenda was looking at him, a sneer on her lips, a final, triumphant glance. He smiled. Not a polite community smile. A smile full of a terrible, wonderful resolve. He pulled out his keys, the heavy metal cold against his palm, and he walked straight to his car. The key fob clicked. The Mustang's interior lights glowed, a warm, inviting amber in the fading light. Alex slid into the driver's seat, the worn leather a familiar friend. The scent of old gasoline, oil, and history filled his nostrils. He ignored the knot of people watching him, ignored the worried look on his wife's face. All he saw was the polished chrome grille in front of him and the reflection of the distant, shimmering pool. He turned the key. The V8 engine caught with a deep, resonant growl, a sound that wasn't loud or clunky, but powerful and alive. It was a sound that belonged on an open road, not in a sterile suburban parking lot. The polite hum of the party faltered. Conversations died. All heads turned toward the vintage beast, its exhaust pipe a low, steady heartbeat. Brenda's jaw dropped. She was still on her phone, her voice a shrill protest. Alex shifted the car into drive and slowly, deliberately pulled out of the parking spot. He wasn't heading for the exit. He was turning, steering the nose of the car toward the clubhouse. A security guard, a young man with a headset, started to move toward him, holding up his hands. Alex met his eyes and gave a small, confident nod. The guard, frozen by a mixture of confusion and something that looked like awe, hesitated, then stepped aside. The car crawled over the curb, a gentle thump as the tires met the grass. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. Alex could see the panic on her face, but there was a flicker of something else there too, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Was it pride? The tires chewed lightly into the perfect lawn, leaving behind a subtle track. He navigated around a decorative fountain, the rumble of the engine echoing off the clubhouse walls. He was on the main path now, a wide paved walkway designed for golf carts and polite pedestrians. "He's going to the pool!" someone yelled, the words a mix of disbelief and morbid curiosity. A buzz, then a murmur, then a wave of excited chatter swept through the crowd. People were pulling out their phones not to call the committee but to record, to document this act of beautiful, insane rebellion. He stopped at the edge of the paved path, just feet from the shimmering turquoise water. He shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was an expectant silence filled with an electric charge. Then a voice broke the quiet. "Dude, that is sick!" A young kid, maybe 14, in a bright orange shirt, ran to the car, his eyes sparkling. He was followed by a half-dozen others. An older man in a fedora walked up, a wide smile on his face. He leaned down and ran his hand over the fender. "A 67 fastback?" "She's a beauty." "My first car was one of these." The dam broke. People who had been whispering a moment ago were now crowding around the car, their faces lit up with a genuine enthusiasm that was completely alien to this place. Men in polo shirts and women in sundresses who had been stiff and reserved just moments before were now pointing, asking questions, and taking photos. The Mustang, a monument of his defiance, had become a center of attention, a beacon of personality in a sea of conformity. Brenda, meanwhile, was a storm of fury. Her face was red, her phone pressed to her ear as she shrieked into it. "He's done what?" "The Mustang! He's parked it right next to the pool. You need to get here now. The bylaws." "The bylaws!" Brenda's husband, a mild-mannered man named Greg, who seemed to exist in a permanent state of apology, tried to calm her down. "Brenda, come on, people are just looking at it." "It's kind of cool." Her head whipped around. "Cool? Greg, this is a violation of every principle we stand for. This is a complete disrespect of the community standards. This is a disgrace." But no one was listening to her. The crowd had enveloped Alex. He was fielding questions, telling stories about the restoration, and for the first time since he had moved here, he felt like himself. He wasn't Alex, Sarah's husband. He wasn't the guy with the weird car. He was Alex, the man who had brought a piece of history to life, and everyone was cheering him on. Then he saw a face he didn't expect. The security guard from earlier was walking toward him, but this time he was followed by two men in suits, their expressions grim. These weren't partygoers. These were board members. The president of the association, Richard, and his vice president, Mark. "Alex Sterling," Richard said, his voice as cold and flat as a steel door. "Do you realize the damage you've caused? The bylaws are quite clear about vehicles on walkways, and a fine for such a flagrant violation could be substantial. I am aware of the bylaws, Richard, but you are also aware that Brenda has been harassing me for months. My car isn't a menace. It's a piece of art." "That's a matter of opinion," Mark said, glancing pointedly at the subtle tracks in the lawn. "The lawn, however, is not. We will be sending you a bill for the damage." A voice from the crowd spoke up. It was the older man in the fedora. "The damage? It's a couple of tire marks. We'll rake it out for him. We just signed a contract to do the landscaping for the next 5 years. We'll take care of it." The board members looked stunned. This was not the expected response. The community was supposed to be apathetic, a group of polite onlookers. Instead, they were taking sides. They were siding with the car. Brenda was still yelling, pointing at the board members. "Do something! He's in violation! Get it towed! I want it gone!" A new person had arrived on the scene. A woman with a no-nonsense face and a clipboard. She was a representative from the towing company, summoned by Brenda's frantic calls. She eyed the Mustang, then the crowd, then Brenda. Her expression was unreadable. "I need to know exactly where the vehicle is and get the owner's signature for the tow order," she said, her voice a calm, professional counterpoint to the chaos. Brenda pointed a trembling finger at Alex. "Right there. He's the owner. It needs to be removed immediately." The tow truck driver started to make his way through the crowd, his face impassive. The sight of the man, the official symbol of removal and punishment, had a chilling effect. The cheers died down. The phones went back into pockets. The crowd took a collective step back, leaving a silent circle around the Mustang, Alex, and the advancing tow truck. Brenda smirked, a look of pure victory on her face. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs. The initial rush of rebellion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fear. This was no longer a personal feud. This was real. This was a tow truck, a very serious consequence for a single impulsive act. He looked at the tow truck driver, then at his beautiful, defiant car. It was about to be taken away, and there was nothing he could do. The driver reached the car and stooped to get a better look at the undercarriage. He stood back up, shaking his head. "Sorry, lady," he said, looking at Brenda. "This vehicle can't be towed." Brenda's victorious smirk vanished. "What do you mean it can't be towed?" "It's right here." The tow truck driver looked at her, then gestured at the car's perfectly restored chassis. "Look at it. It's a show car. You can't just hook this thing up. The transmission, the custom parts, you'd do tens of thousands of dollars in damage. The owner would sue us into the ground. We can't tow it without a specific flatbed, and that's an order that has to come from the police, not the HOA. He turned to Alex. "Beautiful ride, man. Good job." And with that, he walked back to his truck and drove away, leaving us stunned, speechless. Brenda's face was a masterpiece of disbelief and raw fury, a mask of control finally shattered. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a beached fish. The tow truck driver's departure, a final, casual dismissal of her authority, hung in the air like a taunt. Richard and Mark, the two HOA board members, looked equally stunned, their stern postures deflating in the face of this unforeseen absurdity. The crowd, sensing the dramatic shift in power, let out a collective low cheer. It was quiet, tentative at first, but it grew, a wave of relief and admiration washing over Alex. "This is not over, Alex," Brenda finally spat, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You have defaced community property. I will see to it that you are fined so heavily, you'll be wishing you never laid eyes on that. That thing." She gestured wildly at the Mustang, then at the faint, barely there tire tracks on the grass. The older man in the fedora, the landscaper, stepped forward, his smile unshakable. "Don't you worry, ma'am. Our contract says we're responsible for the health of the lawns. Those tracks will be gone before morning. No fine necessary." Brenda's eyes narrowed to slits. She looked at Richard, a plea for help on her face. Richard, however, was already speaking to Alex, his tone now less accusatory, more cautious. "Alex, look, this has gotten out of hand. We'll discuss this with the full board on Monday. For now, let's just get the party back on track." The board members, seeing their rigid authority dissolve into a puddle of public spectacle, retreated, leaving Brenda standing alone, a scarlet-faced monument to her own impotence. The crowd surged forward again, and this time it was a celebratory wave. Kids wanted to sit in the driver's seat. Adults asked about the restoration process, about the horsepower, about the story behind the car. Alex, a man who had felt so invisible in this neighborhood, was suddenly its center of gravity. As the impromptu car show unfolded, a shadow fell over him. It was Sarah. She pulled him gently by the arm, her grip tight. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions. "Alex, what have you done?" "My God, everyone is looking at us. And Brenda, she's going to make our lives a living hell." "She already was," he said, his voice calmer than he expected. The rush of adrenaline had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. "I was tired of it, Sarah. I was tired of living by her stupid rules. But this is a nuclear option. It's not just about a car anymore. It's about fines and community meetings and being the family everyone talks about." "The wrong family." Her voice trembled slightly. "This is not what we moved here for." "And what did we move here for, Sarah? So I could keep my passion locked in a garage? So we could pretend to be someone we're not?" He looked at her, his eyes searching. "Didn't you see the way people's faces lit up? That's real. That's what's been missing here. This place is beautiful, but it's sterile." She was silent, her gaze falling to the ground. He could see the struggle in her eyes. The conflict between the life she had worked so hard to build and the man she had fallen in love with. The man who was now standing next to a car parked next to a pool. A one-man revolution. "I'm worried, Alex," she whispered. "What happens when the cheering stops and the fines arrive? What happens when she turns the whole community against us?" He didn't have an answer for that. But at that moment, a woman he had never met before walked up to them. "You're Alex, right?" she asked. She had a kind face and held a small plastic plate of canapes. I just wanted to say thank you. You have no idea how much we needed that. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile. We've all been living in fear of Brenda's committees for years. The statue in my yard? She said it was a distraction. My son's basketball hoop? A safety hazard. This was amazing. Don't let her intimidate you. Alex felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't just stood up for himself. He had, without knowing it, stood up for everyone else. The cheers hadn't been for the car. They had been for him. They had been for hope. Brenda, meanwhile, had retreated to the safety of her home, her husband Greg trying desperately to placate her. She was on her laptop, a furious blur of clicking keys and mouse movements. She wasn't looking at the HOA bylaws anymore. She was on the community's social media page, a private forum where all the neighbors were supposed to post about lost pets and upcoming events. She was crafting a post, a manifesto. She typed with a vicious ferocity, her words dripping with self-righteous outrage. She didn't mention the car or the pool. She spun a new narrative. Alex Sterling, she wrote, was a vandal. He had disregarded a legitimate request from the HOA board to move his vehicle. He had damaged the lawn. He was a menace to the peaceful, established order of the Bluffs. She called for an emergency vote, a referendum to impose a severe fine on him and to establish new, stricter rules to prevent future disruptions. She pressed post with a trembling finger, a self-satisfied smile spreading across her lips. The phone in Alex's pocket buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. He pulled it out and opened the community page. Sarah looked over his shoulder. Oh, Alex, no. She's turned them against you. But as he scrolled, a look of confusion, then wonder, then dawning realization spread across his face. The comments weren't what Brenda had hoped for. Damage? Brenda, I've seen my kids' playdates do more damage to the lawn. This whole thing is ridiculous. That car is beautiful. Can we get a closer look? I'm with Alex. It's about time someone stood up to the committee. The comments were a flood, a tide of pushback that Brenda had never anticipated. People she had bullied for years, people who had cowered in the face of her demands, were now finding their voices. The impromptu car show had become an impromptu protest, and it was happening online, a digital uprising she could not control. Richard, the board president, also saw the post. He called Mark. Did you see this? We have a PR disaster on our hands. The community is turning on us. We need to do damage control. And Brenda, she needs to be reined in. The next day, a notice appeared in every resident's email inbox. It wasn't from Brenda. It was from the HOA board, signed by Richard and Mark. It was a formal apology for the misunderstanding at the summer soiree. It stated that the board would be reviewing all of the bylaws to ensure they reflected the diverse tastes and preferences of all residents. And it concluded with an announcement. A new community choice program, where residents would be able to submit projects for approval by a vote of the entire community, not a single self-appointed liaison. The email was a public, unequivocal slap in the face to Brenda's authority. She sat in her living room staring at the email on her screen, her hands shaking. The Mustang was still parked by the pool, a symbol of defiance she couldn't touch. The community was no longer silent, and the board she had manipulated was no longer her puppet. She was alone, her power completely unraveled, and in a final, humiliating twist of karma, the man she had tried to destroy had just become the most popular person in the entire neighborhood. The week that followed was a strange, disorienting sort of victory. The Mustang, still parked by the pool, had become a neighborhood landmark, a symbol of a silent rebellion that had suddenly found its voice. People would stop their cars to take pictures, to point it out to their kids. The impromptu car show had become a permanent exhibition, and the community, no longer bound by Brenda's tyranny, began to change. Neighbors who had only ever exchanged polite nods now stopped and talked in the street, sharing stories of petty grievances and small acts of defiance. The woman who had thanked Alex had started a weekly coffee group. The landscaper, whose name was Dave, had a beer with Alex and told him he'd always wanted to own a classic car. The polite, sterile perfection of the Bluffs had cracked, and through the fissure, a little bit of genuine humanity had begun to seep through. For Sarah, the change was more complex. The initial dread had faded, replaced by a cautious relief. People weren't shunning them. They were embracing them. She felt a lightness she hadn't known she was missing, a freedom to be herself that had been suffocated by the unspoken rules of the community. She looked at Alex, the quiet man she had married, and saw a side of him she hadn't seen in a long time, confident, proud, and completely at ease in his own skin. He had fought a battle she hadn't even known they were in, and he had won. Brenda, meanwhile, had vanished from public view. Her house was a fortress, the curtains drawn, the pristine lawn a silent testament to a world that was no longer hers. Her furious post on the community forum had been a public spectacle, and the torrent of negative comments had been a humiliation of epic proportions. Her husband, Greg, had been seen buying groceries alone, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The HOA board, in their public email, had effectively and permanently stripped her of her Community Standards Liaison title. She had lost her power, her purpose, her entire identity in the Bluffs. And a woman like Brenda, who had built her entire sense of self on a foundation of control, would not take such a loss lightly. A new kind of tension, cold and silent, settled over the neighborhood. The cheering had stopped, the excitement had faded, and now there was only a sense of waiting. Everyone, including Alex, knew it wasn't over. A predator doesn't simply retreat after being wounded. It hides, it plots, and it prepares for a new, more vicious attack. Alex had received a formal letter from the HOA board on Monday morning. It was an official notification of the misunderstanding and an invitation to meet with the board to discuss a mutually agreeable solution for the Mustang. Alex, with Sarah's encouragement, had decided to let the car stay. It was a statement, and he wasn't ready to back down. The letter had been a polite truce, a recognition of his new power within the community. But he knew it was also a warning. The nights were the hardest. The car sat under the glow of the clubhouse floodlights, a beautiful, vulnerable target. Every strange noise, every distant siren made Alex's heart jump. He'd find himself staring out the window, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand, a silent vigil for the car that had changed everything. One night, the silence was absolute. It was past midnight. The party was a distant memory. The neighborhood was asleep. Alex and Sarah were in bed, the low hum of the air conditioning a white noise against the quiet. A distant sound, muffled but distinct, cut through the calm. It was the low rumble of a large truck, an engine sound that didn't belong to the sleek, quiet SUVs of the Bluffs. Alex shot up in bed, a cold dread washing over him. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Sarah was already awake, her eyes wide and full of the same fear that had just gripped him. "It's a truck. A big one." They ran to the window. The clubhouse floodlights were still on, casting a harsh, theatrical light on the pool area. A large, professional-looking flatbed tow truck was parked next to the Mustang, its hydraulic arm already engaged, a steel chain wrapped around the car's frame. Two men, their faces obscured by the shadows and the brim of their caps, were working with a practiced, ruthless efficiency. "No," Alex breathed, grabbing his shorts and a t-shirt. No, Alex, don't. "Just call the police," Sarah pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. "It's a tow truck." "It's gone. She's doing it. She hired someone." He was already halfway down the stairs, his mind a furious blur. This wasn't a fine. This was an act of pure, premeditated malice. This was Brenda's answer to his defiance. He flung the front door open and ran into the humid night, his bare feet slapping against the concrete. Hey, what are you doing? That's my car!" The men on the flatbed didn't even look up. The hydraulic lift hummed, and the Mustang, in a slow, agonizing ballet of surrender, rose off the ground. The rumble of the engine from the truck was a mocking laugh in the night. Alex reached the street, yelling and waving his arms. The two men finally stopped, their faces still in the shadows. One of them pointed to a piece of paper taped to the driver's side window of the Mustang. "It's a repo order, sir," the man said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Legally signed. This vehicle is being impounded." Alex felt the blood drain from his face. A repo order? That was impossible. The car was his, no liens, no loans. This was a complete fabrication. He scrambled for his phone to call the police, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He could hear Sarah screaming his name from the house, telling him to stop. The men finished securing the car. The winch whirred, and the Mustang slid up the incline, its beautiful wheels spinning uselessly as it was dragged onto the flatbed. Alex felt a sick, hollow dread in his stomach. The flatbed's engine roared to life, and the truck began to pull away. "Stop! That's a lie! I'm calling the police!" Alex yelled, running after it. The truck, with the precious Mustang on its back, picked up speed. Alex, panting and desperate, saw something taped to the Mustang's rear window. A note. He squinted, trying to read it in the dim light of the taillights. The note was small, handwritten. As the truck turned a corner and sped away into the night, the note became clear. It was a single perfect word, scrawled in neat cursive, "Bylaws." Alex stood alone in the empty street, the sound of the truck's engine fading into the distance. It wasn't a repo order. It was Brenda's twisted final joke. A warning. He was a man who lived by the rules, and in a single, devastating act, she had used her own perverted sense of law to steal the very thing he had fought so hard to protect. The car was gone, taken by the person who had created the bylaws in the first place, and in that moment, he knew a fight was no low. Alex stood in the empty street, the humid night air clinging to his skin. The silence, now that the truck was gone, was a vacuum of sound. His mind, however, was a roaring cacophony. The word bylaws burned behind his eyes. It was a taunt. A final, cruel blow delivered with surgical precision. This wasn't a fine or a reprimand. It was a theft, sanctioned by the very law Brenda had sworn to uphold. Sarah was at his side, her hand on his arm, her body trembling. "Alex, what do we do?" she whispered. The question laced with a helplessness that broke his heart. He looked at her, his eyes cold and hard in the dim glow of the streetlights. The fear that had gripped him was gone, replaced by a searing white-hot fury. He hadn't been this angry since the night he'd bought the Mustang, fighting off a shady mechanic who tried to rip him off. That anger was about a car. This anger was about something else entirely. It was personal. It was a violation. "We get it back," he said, his voice flat and deadly, "and we end her." They spent the rest of the night on the phone, a furious, desperate search for answers. He called the police, who informed him it was a civil matter, a dispute between the HOA and a resident. He was told to contact the management company that handled the HOA's legal affairs. He called the management company's emergency line, and after being bounced around for an hour, was told that the board had filed a specific and quite peculiar request for the removal of a vehicle that was in violation of a specific bylaw concerning long-term obstructions to community common areas. There was no mention of a repo order. The men on the truck had lied. This was an ambush, a dirty trick. He finally got through to Richard, the HOA president, at 3 a.m. Alex's voice was shaking with rage. "Richard, you need to tell me what's going on. My car is gone. A tow truck took it." Richard's voice on the other end was genuinely confused. "What? Alex, I told you we were waiting to talk on Monday." "We didn't authorize a tow." "The company said you did. They said the board authorized a removal." "They lied." That was Brenda. She filed a special request through an old loophole in the bylaws she found. She got a judge to sign a temporary order to have a vehicle considered a nuisance removed. She did this completely on her own, without the board's approval. Richard sighed, a sound of deep, exhausted frustration. She's been off the rails since the party. She used her old title to pull this off. The rage in Alex's stomach solidified into a hard, focused resolve. She hadn't used the board's authority. She had weaponized a long-forgotten bylaw. This wasn't a fight against an entire community anymore. It was a duel. The next morning, the neighborhood was in a state of quiet shock. The pristine green patch by the pool was empty, a stark, glaring hole where the Mustang had been. People who had cheered and taken photos now looked at Alex and Sarah with a mixture of pity and a simmering anger. They had been brave for a moment. But Brenda, even in her defeat, had proven she was more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Alex and Sarah spent the day meeting with a lawyer recommended by a neighbor. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with a piercing gaze, listened to their story, a small smile playing on her lips. When Alex told her about the repo order and the bylaws note, she leaned forward. She used a loophole to file a civil complaint of a nuisance. A legitimate, if archaic, process, the lawyer explained. But the tow company and Brenda told you it was a repo order, a fraudulent claim. That's something else entirely. That's a serious crime. We have her on fraud, false claims, and possibly civil theft. Alex felt a cold calm wash over him. This was it. This was his opening. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting for that evening. The agenda was simple: what to do about Brenda's actions and the public relations nightmare they had created. Word had spread through the community like wildfire. The town forum was a furious, overflowing torrent of comments. People who had been afraid to speak out were now demanding justice. They didn't just want the car back. They wanted Brenda gone. The meeting was held in the same clubhouse where the party had been. It was packed. Every chair was filled. People stood in the back. The air was thick with tension. Richard and Mark sat at a long table, their faces grim. Brenda sat on the opposite side of the table, her head held high, a defiant smirk on her face. She was flanked by her husband, Greg, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. Brenda, sensing the hostile atmosphere, saw it as a victory. The town was buzzing because of her. She was the one who had taken control, the one who had done what the weak-willed board was afraid to do. She had won. Richard began the meeting, his voice strained. We are here tonight to address a very serious situation. The HOA board was not involved in the removal of Mr. Sterling's vehicle. The actions taken were unauthorized and against the will of this board. A voice from the back of the room yelled, "Then where is the car?" Brenda rose, a smug smile on her face. The car is in a safe location. The bylaws state that no long-term objects are to obstruct community common areas. I simply enforce the will of the community. What will of the community? The landscaper, Dave, shouted. The will of the community was cheering on that car. Brenda ignored him. She was looking at Alex, a triumphant look in her eyes. This was her moment. She had taken his pride and his passion, and she was going to use it to secure her ultimate power. Alex, however, didn't say a word. He stood up calmly, deliberately, and walked to the front of the room. He was holding a document. It was a printout of the lawsuit his lawyer had prepared, ready to be filed. He laid it on the table, a single piece of paper, and slid it toward Brenda. She looked at it, her smirk faltering. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the page. The words fraud, civil theft, reckless endangerment seemed to leap off the page. She looked up at Alex, a flash of genuine cold fear in her eyes. What is this? She demanded, her voice losing its smugness. That, Alex said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, is the lawsuit I'm filing against you for fabricating a repo order to illegally steal my property. Your lies to the tow truck driver and my wife and I constitute fraud. And the note you left bylaws proves it was all premeditated. You didn't do this for the community, Brenda. You did it to hurt me. A shocked silence fell over the room. Greg's face was ashen. Brenda's hands were shaking as she held the paper. The tables had turned. She had planned to humiliate him publicly, but he had just laid her crime bare for everyone to see. This is a bluff, she stammered, her voice a high, frantic whisper. This is insane. The car was in violation. Maybe it was, Alex said, his gaze unwavering. But that's a civil matter. Stealing is a crime, and I will press charges, Brenda, unless you do two things. First, you get my car back, right now. And second, you resign from any and all positions in this community. I want your letter of resignation on the board's desk by noon tomorrow. If you don't, I will file this lawsuit and I will see you lose everything. The crowd erupted. They weren't just cheering now. They were on their feet, a furious, vengeful wave of support. Richard and Mark looked at Brenda, their faces a mixture of disgust and relief. She had overplayed her hand, and in doing so, had handed them the perfect weapon to finally get rid of her. Brenda stood up, tears of pure rage and humiliation streaming down her face. She looked around the room at the faces of the people she had controlled, the people who were now her accusers. She had wanted to be a queen, and now she was nothing but a pariah. She dropped the lawsuit on the table and stormed out of the clubhouse, her husband trailing after her, a silent, beaten man. The door slammed behind her, a punctuation mark on the end of her reign. The next day, the Mustang returned. It was delivered on a flatbed, exactly as the tow truck driver had said it should be. It was driven to a new, dedicated parking spot right next to the clubhouse, and this time, the community watched, not with silent awe, but with a collective, jubilant ownership. The board, in a formal motion, had amended the bylaws to include a new community showcase spot, a designated place where residents could display vehicles of unique aesthetic or historical value. The Mustang was the first, and Alex, a man who had felt so invisible, was now a hero. Brenda was never seen in the community again. She and her husband sold their home and moved away, her perfect world having unraveled into a chaotic mess of her own making. The Mustang stayed. It was a beautiful, powerful symbol of what happens when one man, armed with nothing but his conviction, decides to park his car by the pool and, in doing so, parks it in the heart of a community.